right, I hope that you all enjoyed and learned something from watching 54 Miles to Home. I had never heard that story before. Of course, I'm not from Alabama, but I think that there's so many stories like that. We hear sort of the big names of the civil rights movement, but there are so many people at the grassroots level who really made everything possible, and without them, we wouldn't have been able to affect change. So I'm curious if you all have comments that you'd like to share, questions, things that come to mind for you after watching that this morning. It's a quiet morning. Susan, go ahead. Do we have a mic for? Oh, okay. DR will pass you the mic.
Oh, DR can go first if he wants.
I didn't know if you had something.
So I think that, of course, just stirs up great emotional elements. And because, I was across the divide, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I know when I grew up in Atlanta, and when I was talking about going to college, and I mentioned about going to Auburn, and my dad said, "No, Susan, you can't go to school in the state of Alabama. I don't think it's safe."
Mm.
So kind of interesting. But turning it around another way and thinking kind of positively, I think there's a lesson in there for us about living the lives that we are called to live, and recognizing that despite what we might think, that we do create a legacy. And we are called to be Christ or God in this world, and to be a source of light. And it means something. We don't always know that it means something, but it means something.
Pass it to Ray. Thank you.
I just wanted to speak to something Susan said about Alabama not being safe. And I was in college during those years, and I watched George Wallace stand in the schoolhouse door. And it was such a strange experience because nobody on campus felt badly. I mean, everybody was there for support. I lived in the same dorm that she lived in. Campus was like an armed camp. It was like Europe. I mean, we walked from the dorm, and she had guards before her and after her. And at the quad, there was a Jeep each way, and the Jeeps parted and met because her classroom was at the other end of the quad, and they met there. And she had that little group that walked across from her. There was never any problem on campus. Whatever went on in Tuscaloosa was mainly outsiders.
Mm.
But I never ever, all those years, I never felt unsafe anywhere because there was such a divide over the rebel rousers and those who were just happy to see things change. That Alabama has such a terrible view from the rest of the world to what it actually was here. I mean, I can only speak for myself and my surroundings, but those people that I knew then and were in school with never questioned that it should happen and encouraged that it should happen. And it was the others that created the discord. So it's just unfortunate that the world doesn't know that most of Alabama was not that way.
Mm.
That's all I have to say.
It was the university was kind of being used as a symbol or, for something for people outside. Yeah.
Well, and it was never discussed. Well, I mean, we had body searches when we went into the dorms.
Wow.
I mean, you weren't allowed on campus unless you had an ACT card. But, the students could have cared less and just kind of wished everybody would go away and just let it happen.
Mm.
Anyway.
Thank you. I was going to say on this story, I think it's so interesting, and I can't believe there's not a movie and a Broadway show. I mean, this is
Sure.
amazing. You know, it reminds me of that Broadway show where during 9/11, everyone had to, you know, all the planes were down and had to go on this island, and the island welcomed them, you know, in this time that was so difficult.
Oh, in Newfoundland, right?
Yeah. And so to me, it's similar in that these, you know, these families opened their land. What do I have? What can I give? You know, they had to feel like that. What can I give? Well, I have this land, and how easy for me to be hospitable. But it wasn't easy. You know, they were threatened, as they talked about, and they were, you know, putting themselves in danger, but opening their land. I think that story really, I'd love to hear more of that, you know, even if dramatized, just that story of those nights, they're camping. I mean, can you imagine the camaraderie, you know, the courage it took to be there? I just think it's an amazing story, so thank you for sharing it.
I always wondered how did those people get that far? You know, that's a long walk. And this tells you how it happened.
Well, I think that there must have been some forethought as far as about how long along the road can people get, who has some land around there, who, you know, we could go, like as far as the organizers ahead of time, yeah.
Those weren't necessarily young people making that walk.
No, right. Yeah, and what faith and just strength, you know. John talked about in his sermon today about for change to happen, you know, we pray for change. But God gives us strength, and through the strength comes change, whether that's personal change or societal change, right? But to hear the granddaughters of, was it Mama Rosie, or, you know, who had the store, I mean, there she was raising 6 children and then grandchildren and had, you know, used her resources to create a way of making a living for herself and her family, and then to open that up to people, knowing, even though, as she said, like, I've lived my, 70, that she was, you know, fine with whatever might happen to her, but that ultimately her store and her home were burned down, likely in retribution for hosting people on that march. And knowing that that was a possibility, because how many churches and homes and businesses had been burned or bombed prior to that? You know, this was 65. Plenty of things had been destroyed up until then, right? And just to hear her granddaughters, you know, talking about what she meant to them, and to think about how the people who did know that story over the years have carried that with them, and it has inspired them and empowered them, heartened them to kind of walk out in faith and do things in their own lives. And so I think that's why it's important that Claire, I think, how do you say, Hoy, made the film, and also the people like Philip Howard and others who are trying to preserve those properties so that all of us, but you know, you imagine school children going and visiting on field trips, or university students going out and studying it as part of history classes, or even, I mean, it would be an interesting, if we ever did a St. Stephen's civil rights related pilgrimage, to stop there along the way might be interesting as well. So, well, I don't know if we have comments from online. I'm guessing no, but yes, go ahead.
Something that occurred to me a little bit earlier in our conversation about were so many people who acted with such bravery and courage and integrity, who we never hear about or heard about, and I think that still goes on. But it made me think of is it a hymn or something from the Bible where it talks about that we're standing on the shoulders The saints that went before.
Right? It does sound
Do you
familiar.
know what is that? Do you know what that?
I can't think of which particular one. It's probably a hymn or a spiritual that's based on some
Right,
line of scripture,
right.
though, I think. Yes. Thank you. Now, we are standing on the shoulders of those who have gone before, definitely. There's whole books. I used to teach some classes on the civil rights movement, and grateful for the work of a colleague, Davis Houck at FSU, who, with a colleague, David Dixon, who's a political scientist, they've done lots of archival research, and they found at least the textual artifacts of a lot of lesser-known voices from the civil rights movement. They have a whole volume of rhetoric, religion, and the civil rights movement, lots of sermons collected, and other talks given in churches and by church people that were part of the civil rights movement. And a lot of those people you've probably never heard of. And they've done another anthology called Women in the Civil Rights Movement, a whole book full of great speeches by both white and black women from the civil rights era, from the 50s and 60s. All of these voices, they were also doing public speaking, but the ones that you haven't heard of. And then countless grassroots activists who are working alongside people whose role wasn't public speaking, but who are going door to door or helping people to try to register to vote, or being involved in marches and sit-ins, or being the people who helped send their children in to integrate school campuses and so on. Those are, we know just a tiny fraction of those stories are known sort of and taught in schools. There's a lot of great oral history work being done to preserve those stories. Well, of course, time is running out to preserve some of those stories. So we have some great resources here in Alabama, of course, with the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute and with the Equal Justice Initiative and their museum and site in Montgomery, and then other places, archives and special collections at University of Alabama and at Auburn. And the work that Diocese of Alabama is doing, of course, we have our Jonathan Daniels pilgrimage that happens each August, I believe, that commemorates the life of an Episcopal seminarian who was here as part of the civil rights movement and was a martyr for the cause. And the diocese is also working on creating a pilgrimage center in Montgomery on one of our church properties that's ideally situated for that. And then we're in the process. Bishop Curry has created what's called the Task Force for Beloved Community, and I'm a part of that, along with about 15 other people from throughout the diocese. And besides working on the pilgrimage and the pilgrimage center, we also have a group of us who are doing work to kind of try to think about what other ways could we offer the diocese as far as formation for people in parishes and training for clergy, and just to kind of, what are some ways that we haven't kind of come at this before that we can offer to not just the people in our Episcopal churches of the state, but, to really people throughout Alabama at large. So good work is happening. The events of the last 10 years, I think, have opened up a lot in terms of discussion. Yesterday was the 10-year anniversary of Trayvon Martin being killed down in Sanford, Florida, which is just up the road from my sending parish, St. Peter's in Central Florida. And so much has happened in those intervening 10 years as far as a resurgence in conversation about matters of race and reconciliation and healing in our country. So I'm grateful for you all for being here and reflecting with us on this morning. So thank you.